because it's a work laptop, it's being blocked. Well, it works on a new channel.
It works on a new channel. Or a new video.
Install whatever you want now.
Because he's usually never asked to receive the installation after you did file.
There you go. It's done.
It works on a new channel, so I guess.
Pretty bad for actually seeing things though.
Is that even on? Or
it's on. It's the exact same thing there.
Oh, because it's like. And what if we have like a white background?
No.
Trying to bring it up. It might just be easier to. Do you see anything on the stream?
Just waiting for it. Because the stream lags.
Yeah, there's like a 20-second delay. Span it.
Let's just mirror. How about that? We'll just mirror the news.
That's not better. Must be on the stretch now.
Yeah, we can put it like all the way here.
You wanna pass it over there?
Oh, we can just use the laptop, and then we can still include this for presenter.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the news.
Which laptop are you gonna include?
Mine.
Oh, okay.
Because we can't connect to you.
That works. That let me.
I'm just trying to find your news link right now, but.
But you're gonna have to have the same stuff open as me.
Yep. I mean, I feel like it won't be such a big deal because this is their not normal setup. Can you send me the link? Because I am just not trying to mail. I think I deleted it.
That should be one. And then just verify that we have like 8 links.
So we're just going in the order of list?
Yeah. There should only be 8 that we need to talk about. Sure. Which is, 9 that we need to talk about.
I should open a new one.
A lot of it's backstory.
I'd like it to be with people my age. My entire team is like 50 or above.
So those are people like.
I was looking for like a program to do it, but I need someone like to talk things that I like, like video games and shit. No one likes it's a real thing, yeah.
Alright, going right to left.
They're all thinking about their talking about their kids and stuff. It's like I can relate.
Nope, this time it's going left. Yeah, right to left.
He comes by.
creative website. Crack attacks.
That's the part.
Oh man, I'm going off on the brand new bones.
That's the part that bothers me.
None of the quotations, right?
No, those are just for laughing at later on. Don't worry about those.
I can work at home, my co-op, because EA can use my green card to work down at their head office. Shit, I was like, who the fuck would hire you? Definitely not EA. Definitely.
All right, I'll open the other links later.
Wasn't he the guy that said that Linux is not cost effective? So I'm gonna play
No,
We will.
that's
So you're streaming the bits from the camera and your laptop. We're actually presenting
the way you code.
it's code and it works. You don't want to see my scripts.
It's verbose and gives a fuck. I don't even understand.
Let me know.
It's like 40 fucking lines in a simple task. Nobody can do it. It's not COBOL.
Yes, it is. Shut up.
Hello!
God.
Hello.
The fuck are you running off to? Is that good enough for you? Yeah, well, I've been like MIA for a while.
This is the guy that you're thinking of. It's like all crap.
What's that?
Our guest is in here.
Oh, he is.
Yeah, I hate the script. It's terrible. It's too slow.
All right, that'll be good for now.
I had to write a script to grab ATIDs
Almost ready.
from their email associated with them. Oh, it works.
And then I guess you can paste the channel link into chat. 'Cause,
It was slow. It took like 20. So the problem wasn't
paste the channel link.
YouTube one into
Yeah.
the
Mattermost.
problem actually wasn't I wasn't limited.
Paste the YouTube channel into the
I wasn't
town square
limited
channel.
by my
Gotcha.
laptop I was running. I was limited by.
Turn that around.
Oh my god. Okay. I really like what happened here.
Yeah, I was streaming the whole time, but
Fantastic.
Detonated chair.
I don't like it. I don't want to do that one. Small news. All right.
He introduces himself as produced, then 3 months later.
All right. Is everybody ready to go for today? No. I mean, this is probably. You're done? All right. Get out of here.
get out of here.
All right. So everyone, welcome to ISSessions Strike Edition. It is going to be a quiet and fairly short one, but we do have a guest speaker for the day. We're going to more or less stick to the new format.
Where's your mic?
Down here.
Why is it down there?
Do we have a mic to hand out to
No,
people?
it's the
I mean-
little stem thing.
There's no batteries in this one. We have a mic without batteries if you want that, just as a prop.
It would make us feel more care. Is it recorded? Yes.
Oh yeah,
Doesn't
yeah.
matter.
We've been streaming through the entire setup.
Yeah.
So anyways,
What's your mic for now?
this one's good for now. Like,
You got talking.
is that really better?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's crunchy.
Yes. Anyways, welcome to ISSessions Strike Week. It's going to be the same format we've been doing for a few weeks now. So we're going to have a few main stories we're going to talk about, and there's one or two quick little headlines that we're just going to brush over so we can get to the fun stuff. The first one that popped up relatively recently is the big South African cyber hack. We're back to using cyber hack, by the way, as a term, which it's a great term. So apparently what happened here is very strange. A system admin actually uploaded their pretty much entire production server, more or less, to the internet. Yeah, that's great. That's the new cloud backup. You just give them everything. Yeah, so that's apparently half of the population of South Africa right now that was put up on this one.
Do we find the Prince of Nigeria?
No, not yet.
Oh.
Not yet.
Which one?
Well, there's only one, right?
Yeah.
He's been emailing us all. So the second thing that happened, that apparently there is a new IoT troop botnet that's supposed to be way bigger than Mirai. They've apparently detected this on 60% of all corporate networks. We're not sure where they're getting these statistics, but that's a fairly large claim to make. It's Checkpoint, actually, so maybe they're onto something. They've been fairly reputable, but that's a scary one to see. And if anybody saw one of the grad projects that I was involved with over the summer, these cameras that they're talking about are garbage. They're basically all default credentials, so there's not much to see there. And then finally, we're going to jump into a little bit of the backstory for one of the main things today, and we're going to go all the way back to 2014 to do it. If you remember, way back when, we had Heartbleed that showed up. That was a major flaw at the time, and it started one of these things that we now call these branded or named vulnerabilities. Like, show of hands, who has actually heard of Heartbleed? I assume it's most of you at this point in time. Great. And we knew it was a fairly serious vulnerability, that people could essentially start reading back segments of the memory of all these servers. And at the time, it was claimed that 2/3 of all of these internet-facing servers were affected. And then it took almost 2 years for them to start to resolve some of these things. And at the time, I was a big supporter of, like, when there is a serious bug and they do put a name on it and brand it, that is not that bad. It got a lot of attention, got a lot of attraction because it had a fun little logo and it had a pretty cool name. And that stuck with for a fairly long time. So then even 2 years later, though, as I was saying, that it's still kind of stuck around, that there was still hundreds of thousands of these servers, so maybe it wasn't effective as that what we had hoped. So it stuck around. It still had a great logo. You can still buy shirts.
Brian says the stream's
Do you have to disclose that you're selling these shirts or something?
What's that?
Are you selling these shirts or something?
No.
Okay, good.
I would like to buy one, though, if you're selling.
Is it still down or
No?
the channel? The stream?
I totally checked it, like, and then there's all these YouTube things that shows it's not working.
Fair enough.
There's a new link if you check Mattermost.
Anyways, there was a few more of the years, things like Poodle that showed up, one of those downgrade attacks on TLS. There was Shell Shock, which again was a fairly serious bug, but people kept on selling themselves and these sort of bugs with them. They put brands on them, they put up websites, and eventually there was some backlash. So people started putting up pages like this, sort of making fun of all these backronyms and sort of pages that they have created for these bugs, because they really think it's a bit of a sham, it's self-promotion. And then, of course, there was Badlock, which was another strange and interesting kind of case, because the fellow created a branded vulnerability for his own code and his own patch.
I can't load it.
So again, someone made another page with a similar name. This is Sadlock, where they once again just rip on the guy because they found this to be a bit sketchy behavior. It's mostly self-promoting, but if it's a serious issue, maybe it does help in the end, and that's something that you guys can sort of discuss with us later. And then finally, we end up coming over to the main event of this week, and that was Crack. K-R-A-C-K, Crack. And once again, we have a logo, arguably not that great. And before this actually dropped, there was a lot of chatter on Twitter. People were saying, like, all right, at 12 o'clock, we're going to release this paper, and the internet will be ruined. You shut it down, it's over. What's that?
Devastatingly critical.
Devastatingly critical. That's what they were saying, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, or fortunately, that really wasn't the case. But there was a lot of hype about it before this actually showed up. And I do want to actually explain a bit of what was happening here so we can all really understand how severe this was or was not. So way back when we had WEP, and that was discovered that was pretty much broken entirely, they implemented they amended the 802.11 protocol, and they started to bring out 802.11i. And this brought in the sort of WPA2 thing that we know today, and that's where the flaw was actually found. Now, when you're associating with these networks, there is a handshake, a four-way handshake that happens that is used for mutual authentication. So the router knows who you are, and you know who the router is. You exchange keys, and that is exactly where this flaw showed up. Anything want to jump in?
get to the point where eventually that these standards are created in a closed source forum. So essentially, before anyone can get to it, it's mostly released to industry-wide companies and manufacturers to start utilizing this right away. And you won't be able to, the earliest you can actually start looking at this code and say, hey, we're gonna start finding bugs is 6 months. And within that, and at that 6 months, you also have to be able to get into the closed forum. So it's just purely just like scientists and developers all in that forum, but none of them are actually like security specialists. So they won't even test this closed source before someone finds out something big as this.
You could buy your access into this and review it if you wanted to, but I can tell you right now that's basically nobody's hobby, and that's not going to help actually secure this. So just diving a little bit deeper into what was happening, it was an issue with the cryptographic nonces they used in this four-way handshake. Now, for those in the audience who haven't got to those crypto courses yet, the nonce is just a number you use once. It's very useful when we talk about things like replay attacks, preventing those, having unique session keys, things like that. It is very useful when it comes into cryptographic aspects. Now, the strange thing that happened with this attack in the handshake, we could actually replay parts of that handshake to force this nonce to revert back to its earlier state. And you would have that nonce be repeated over and over again. And already, if this is sounding a little bit stranger than, the internet has broken claim that they initially threw out, that's because this was a little bit overhyped. So I'm going to read right off this page somewhere in here. I have a snippet on my screen, but it says, when encrypting packets in case a message that uses re-keystream has known content, so we already have to perform the actual replay of the handshake, have known content of this, it becomes trivial to derive the keystream. That's not still exactly trivial, and knowing what is actually going on in each of those packets, that known plain text on the other side, is still fairly hard to do. So even if all those things lined up for you and you knew what was going on, there was a chance that depending on which system you were actually attacking, you would only have unidirectional decryption or spoofing in one direction. And it turns out by the time this patch had actually been dropped, or they released this paper, that most Windows implementations, Windows 7, Windows 10, and iOS had already patched this entirely. So as of right now, it really doesn't sound that bad, but once we get down into the parts about some of the Linux packages, some of these embedded systems, and especially Android, it becomes possibly the only dangerous portion that we're going to talk about here. Did you read into this one? No. All right.
I read it's illegal.
See if I can find it. I believe there's a chart somewhere in this one or the paper that I'll try to pull up real quick. Do you have the paper? I don't have paper up. There we go. So that little graph in the right side of the screen there, it shows you which part of their attacks, because included in this actual disclosure in this white paper were numerous CVEs that affected each of them differently. There was one that involved that resetting of that nonce used when actually completing this handshake. There was ones that involved the group key, and they had different severity. But if you do start looking down at Windows 10, it was really only that group key that came an issue, and then the attack surface and the actual results of what they were able to exploit was very minimal. But once we look over at the Android packages, there is a lot that is actually vulnerable to these attacks right now. And as we know about some of these Android devices, they will more or less never be patched. This was for Android 6.0. And most of your phones, hopefully, are still getting some of those Android updates. But over time, as they start to deprecate those and stop supporting them, they never get fixed on this. So people started asking what they could actually do about this. How dangerous was it in the end? Some of the ways you can protect themselves, and I'll show you one very bad article if I brought that one up just yet. Obviously, this is an actual issue with Wi-Fi, or 802.11.i. So you have to be within physical range to receive this signal. Even then, you have to go through that entire process, have known plain text to complete some of these attacks. But there, of course, are things that I said that you can't patch. These are unidirectional. But I think the issue that people were hammering home on Twitter is that if you were relying on WPA2 for the entirety of your local network security, that you've already failed in some ways. HTTPS already protects everything within those communications. Of course, that's going to protect even more of your traffic if they do actually launch this attack successfully. And VPNs are still fantastic. That's more encryption that you can use that's going to protect you if someone is on your network. But relying on WPA2 alone to protect that traffic, it shouldn't have been an expectation. All right, and I'll bring up the one article that is kind of really bad about how people recommended you protect yourself. Of course, there's the panic button.
Why isn't the panic button bigger? It's gotta be
Yes, use Ethernet. You plug your computer in, you plug your phone in somehow, and then you fixed everything. Use cellular data, great.
You can plug your phone into Ethernet.
I know. Of course, things like use HTTPS everywhere, fantastic. But then down here, it says VPNs, you can't trust any of them.
Move to the woods. That's the best
Yes,
way.
and then move to the woods.
So, Racky's plan?
Is that where he wins?
He's waiting on updates just out of the woods. I'm pretty sure the only reason he doesn't live in the woods right now is because he can't get fiber there.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of sensationalism about these kind of branded vulnerabilities and sort of media immediately taking the headlines of their papers that say, like, we hacked the internet, which isn't remotely true, but they run with it and they publish it. And then when it ends up in, you know, like people who aren't very tech savvy, this is what they hear and understand. If you go through the white papers, there's still critical vulnerabilities, again, for Android, older platforms that just can't be patched. There is definitely going to be some issues. But for a lot of the things, it has been patched if you keep your things updated. And that's usually the lesson when these things come out, just patch, patch, patch.
Except a lot of routers right now won't get patched, so. But
No,
luckily,
no.
it's mostly just client side, right? So,
Yeah, it depends on which version you have, if I go back to the chart.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, branded vulns. Anybody have comments on that one? You may have to shout down a little bit.
They sound cool, that's
They do sound cool. Some logos are better than others.
it. It lets the C-levels understand that there's security in the world.
Right.
Just get paid.
That does help.
Brand name,
And you know what?
no.
I think it has been quite helpful for security as a whole. Like going back to 2014, it was not very often you saw big security things in the news. 2017, we haven't gone like in ISSessions this year without having major headlines popping every time. So maybe it has helped. I don't know. More work, yeah. We don't need more work, really.
And it makes them worry about their security for like about a week until
Yes.
the news forgets about it.
Yeah, and then I start to wonder if they're beginning to become apathetic about this whole thing. Because, you know, another week, another critical vulnerability. Why bother? Anything else to throw in there?
You're on your own.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Suicide.
What?
That is not the answer.
Probably not.
Hey, it is an answer, but not the answer.
Anywho, yeah, it's a short news week this week, but that's really all that we wanted to talk about there. Oh no, there was one more, wasn't there? It was the
RSA.
Infineon, the RSA vuln that they found.
Yeah.
Do you have that one up? So it was this encryption chip flaw. Once again, crypto is not broken, but there was an actual failure in implementation when they made a whole bunch of these chips that were implementing RSA. A whole bunch of devices were actually
From one manufacturer.
from one manufacturer, yes. It was Infineon specifically. Yep, I think it was like 1.5% of UBICOs that were actually affected by this, which isn't so bad. But pulling right out of the article here, there was a flaw in the public key encryption pair that was generated that made it possible for an attacker to work out a 1024-bit and 2048 RSA key stored on the TPM simply by having the public key. That said, simply by having the public key. It forgot to mention the years of CPU time actually guessing against it. So again, be very careful when people are writing these articles because that's kind of critical here.
You sure it wasn't the NSA that gave them the wrong RSA encryption?
Sure. If you want to go down that road, sure they could have. But
Because they done it once before.
the same article I was probably pointing at here actually referred to RSA and, NIST actually back in 2013 disallowed 1024-bit keys for RSA for a lot of digital signatures. They said that's not good enough anymore. And of course, in this case, that is entirely correct because it could effectively split the number of guesses in half, which is great. Or the degree of difficulty in half, rather. So if you actually had a worst case for a 2048-bit key, one would require no more than 17 days and $40,000 of a 1,000 instance machine on AWS. That's pretty good. Or if you were trying to crack a 1024 with this vuln, it would only take 45 minutes and $76. So if you do want to go break some really old certs that are soon to expire, then go ahead.